Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... This weekend, I'm reviewing the occult-based horror novel The Reaping by Bernard Taylor. Now, before I get started, I would like to note that although I have been familiar with Bernard Taylor's name ever since I was a teenager, I never had given him a chance until recently. And I honestly don't know why, because I've always heard good reviews about his books, but it wasn't until I had uploaded a video asking for horror book recommendations that were good slow burners. And the viewer known as Sloan Chessman suggested that I give The Reaping a try. And after I mentioned to my good online friend Gina that The Reaping was next on my TBR, she decided that she would like to read this with me, so we ended up doing it as a buddy read. Then, upon us finishing our read, we both agreed that this book was a great follow-up to Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco, which we had finished reading like about a week prior. And even though The Reaping is a great horror novel, I really do agree with what Gina said by how Burnt Offerings is like a good steak, and The Reaping is like a good bag of chips. Also, even though a good portion of this book takes place over a little less than a year, there's a good segment of it that takes place in the summer, and for that reason, I think that this would be an ideal summer read. But without me rambling on anymore, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Sloan Chessman for recommending this classic, and I would like to thank Gina for reading this with me because we had some pretty cool discussions. So, without further ado, let's go in and head off to Wolvercombe House and see what type of evils lurk about its property. The Reaping by Bernard Taylor is told in first-person perspective and introduces an artist by the name of Tom, who is a widower and a single father. Early on, we see that Tom has dedicated himself to an upcoming week-long holiday with his girlfriend Alona. As a matter of fact, he's so dedicated to this rare opportunity of quality time, he even turns down an important business proposition that conflicts with their date. However, after Alona cancels their holiday due to receiving a movie deal, a simple twist of fate puts Tom back in line for the proposition he turned down, where a wealthy lady by the name of Miss Stewart wants to commission him to paint her great-niece Catherine. From here, Tom goes to Miss Stewart's countryside mansion called Wolvercombe House. Then, after he becomes settled, he begins painting Catherine, and they eventually form a love affair, which he believes will end as soon as his job is done. However, 9 months later, Catherine shows up on his doorstep pregnant, and reveals not only is she pregnant with his child, but they were actually a part of an unholy scheme, and the worst has yet to happen. The Reaping by Bernard Taylor was published in 1980. Among his works, Taylor's first novel, The Godsend, which is perhaps his most famous book, was published in 1976. Then, a year later, Sweetheart, Sweetheart was published, which author Charles L. Grant hailed as one of the finest ghost stories ever written. Yet it wouldn't be until 1980 when Taylor's third novel, The Reaping, hit stores. Aside from his life as an author, Bernard Taylor was an illustrator, a teacher, a Broadway actor, a theater set designer, and a playwright award winner. Also, while Taylor's literary career began in horror, he eventually published award-winning true crime, and under the pseudonym Jess Foley, he published in the genre of romance. Fun facts! Since The Reaping is a horror story that focuses on the seventh son of a seventh son, here's some information that Gina and I found out in regards to that subject. In America and Europe, it is believed that the seventh son of a seventh son is lucky, or he has occult powers or healing powers. Whereas in other countries, the seventh child had other possibilities. In Romania, a seventh child was believed to be a vampire. In France, a seventh son had the power to cure the king's evil. In Ireland, there was belief that a special ceremony was required at the seventh son's birth so he may gain healing powers. To ensure what he had power over, his mother would place in his hand whatever substance she had decided on, like silver or coin. Then, when the child was old enough, he would rub the object, and the patient would apply it to an afflicted part for healing purposes. Also, there was a belief in Britain that the seventh son of a seventh son was destined to be a doctor and would have great knowledge on healing. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler section, which I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience of this book for you if you have never read it before. And if you would like to skip this section, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments and you'll see that I have a pinned comment at the top with the timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few moments that really took me by surprise. First off, the whole motive was something that I did not see coming whatsoever, which, prior to this, we understand that Tom has come from a large family, and he's produced quite a few children of his own. Also, we understand that Miss Stewart and her workers did some stalker-level research into Tom's past, but we don't understand how this is all playing out together. Then, when Tom sits down and starts to outline his family tree like how he saw in the case file at Wolvercombe, he discovers that the people of the house are in need of a seventh son of a seventh son, but we still don't really understand why. Well, after Tom goes to the library and does some research, we discover that a seventh son of a seventh son is necessary because they are believed to have these magical powers, and the people of Wolvercombe needs this seventh son so they can perform a ritual. So, up until this moment, I was already invested in the story, but this honestly gave me a whole other level of love for the book because I'm a sucker for mysticism and the occult. Also, this reveal made me feel like this was a male version of Rosemary's Baby, which I absolutely loved, and it really amped me up for what would happen next, because this whole scenario provided more questions than answers. The next moment that caught me off guard was the twist reveal regarding Tom's son, Simeon, which this comes about because when Tom goes to pick Simeon up from school one day, he sees where someone in a rover has kidnapped him. From here, Tom follows the rover to Wolvercombe House, where Simeon's abductors eventually take him to the property's tower to perform ritual. Then, when Tom confronts the coven, he learns from Anne that they had miscalculated because when one of the nuns on site had given birth to what they thought was Tom's seventh son, they discovered where this child had no powers whatsoever. So this caused them to sit down and go through all of their information all over again, and this is when they discovered that Tom had accidentally gotten someone pregnant prior to him getting married, which this is a total shocker for Tom because he honestly had no idea that he had any other children besides the ones he was already aware of. Now, this moment really just surprised me because I was so invested in the story, I had totally forgotten that Tom kept a portrait of his ex-girlfriend. And considering how fertile Tom's swimmers are, I should have thought that there was another child somewhere in the mix. But, of course, I was too caught up in everything to even consider this possibility. The final moment that really surprised me was the end reveal of the mastermind's true identity, which at this point I thought all twists and turns had come and gone, but Taylor had one more trick up his sleeve. Now, what happens here is, after Miss Stewart has her minions load her and Simeon onto a lift, they ascend the tower. Then, as Tom is able to gain some leadway, he runs up the stairs and confronts the lift on the top floor, which this is when he discovers that Simeon's youth has been drained from him and he's been left as nothing more than this decrepit old man in a child-sized body. But also, at the same time, we discover that Miss Stewart has regressed into a young woman who is revealed to be Alona. So, I'm really kicking myself in the butt for not figuring this out sooner, because there were literally red flags from beginning to end, especially when Alona was so adamant for Tom to cancel their holiday. Also, I think I was blindsided because even though Alona doesn't have that much page time, there was something about her that I really admired. And when I mentioned this to Gina, she reasoned that Alona felt like a symbol that stood against conventional norms, which she and I both admired. But aside from that, I really had to question exactly how long this had been going on, because we understand that Alona had been in Tom's life for quite some time, and also he's not able to ever contact her. And this makes me wonder how many other people she was running this con on, and exactly when she had set her sights on Tom. So those possibilities are pretty creepy, because it shows that Alona is the type of villain who can bide her time. I would like to use this opportunity to bitch about Tom, because even though he is the hero of this story, he is also, at times, a flat-out douchebag. Like, for example, when he's leaving Wolvercombe House, he's confronted by one of the nuns who's being held captive there. And at first, I think he's gonna save her because he's kicking some ass in her honor and everything. Well, midway into the ass-kicking, one of the captors is like, "Dude, bruh, nah, you got it all wrong. Old girl there, she's insane in the membrane. We ain't doing nothing but trying to help her. Just get in your car and go along your merry little way. We got this taken care of." And what do you think old dumbass Tom does? Drives off. Just drives off without a second thought. And y'all, let me tell you, dipshits like Tom are real. They do exist. And these are people who don't think twice about when someone tells them it's all good, even though you can see otherwise. Now, had I been Tom, at the very least, when I got the hell out of Dodge, I would have got into the first phone and called the police and been like, "Yo, these crazy ass rich bitches out in the sticks, y'all need to check on them because they doing some whacked out shit." And another thing, when Catherine came to Tom and explained to him that he was her baby daddy and everything at Wolvercombe had been orchestrated and he had been used as a breeder, baby, Tom lost his shit. And truth be it, I would have lost my shit too, because you know what, I'm not a breeder or anything like that. But Tom went a step too far because he was going to kick his pregnant baby mama to the curb. And I understand Catherine ain't a saint, but she came to him and came clean and was trying to get help in regards to her unborn child. And all he could do was just be a dick. I was like, dude, seriously. At this point, you're the father of what would equal out to a classroom full of kids. One more kid ain't gonna make that much of a difference. But he does eventually help Catherine, even though she does have to grovel to get his help. And a part of me wants to play devil's advocate and think that maybe the reason why he is this way is because of all of the losses he had in his past, and because of what's gone on in the past, he's taking his anger out on the wrong person. And at the end of the day, Tom is not a bad guy. It's just that every once in a while he needs to be kicked in the balls just to remember how to be a good human being. The Reaping by Bernard Taylor is a great gothic horror slow burn, or as my friend Gina put it, a satanic panic mystery. Now, for the most part, this book knows when to present a twist, and it doesn't overdo it as far as character backstory or development is concerned. Also, something about how the story is structured reminds me of an adulterated contemporary fairy tale. Plus, the book does focus on some pretty adulterated topics like trust issues, self-sabotaging relationships, guilt, and also how one person can use another for self-gain. First off, as I said, the reaping is a slow burner, but in my opinion, this is how a slow burn is done right. Because even though we are getting some character development and backstory, it's not overkill. And as we're learning about our characters, different elements come into play where some of those might seem insignificant until we get to the grand reveal. And because of its pacing and how everything comes together, this really reminded me of a male version of Rosemary's Baby. Character-wise, I really believe that Taylor has an understanding in regards to the complexity of adults, because aside from the villains that are presented in this story, we're given a cast where, for the most part, the lead characters make some good decisions in regards to conflict, whereas other times not so much. But this doesn't mean that they're either entirely good or bad, it just simply means they're flawed human beings. And I would like to take this opportunity to compliment Taylor on his balance between plot and characterization, because I recently read a story that was like 550 pages long or a little bit longer, and it bored me to tears because the character development was just overkill. So in regards to that book, Taylor did a great job in balancing his plot and characters over 220 pages. Theme-wise, I noticed where the subject of trust issues came into play, where it felt like Tom was trying to put up a wall between himself and Catherine. And even though Tom's trust issues aren't spelled out, I got the impression that due to what happened to him at Wolvercombe House and what happened in his last relationship, his knee-jerk response was to overreact in anger, like how he did with Catherine when she was trying to be genuine. Which this leads to the topic of self-sabotaging relationships, which, aside from Tom, who is sabotaging a potentially good relationship with someone who shares his same morals, we have Alona, who is afraid of commitment. Now, ever since the beginning of the book, we saw where Alona has this fear of commitment because she always puts Tom on the back burner, and then when he wanted to build a family with her, she explained that's not the path that she wanted her life to go in, which there's nothing wrong about not wanting to settle down, but the thing is, we eventually learn why Alona can't commit. And I wish I could elaborate a little bit more on that, but if I did, it would reveal some spoilers. Another subject that I noticed was grief, which early on it reveals that Tom is a widower. But as we continue reading, we discover that 3 of his children were killed in a horrible accident. And after this, he and his wife had tried to rebuild, but they were unable to. Then later on, his wife ended up dying of cancer. And after all of this went down, Tom reasoned that you can recover from tragedy, but you're never going to get over tragedy. And you should be appreciative for what you do have, which is some pretty solid advice. Also, the reaping feels like a cautionary tale that warns people about those who use others for self-gain. Now, unfortunately, I can't go into fine detail because that would reveal some spoilers, but this book totally shows how a manipulative person can weasel their way into their victim's life and puppeteer. And it also stretches out to the point where we realize that for this manipulator to gain, they have to bide their time and play their cards right before they can strike. With characters and theme aside, the whole vibe of this book felt like a dark fairy tale. Like, for example, with the character known as Miss Stewart, she reminded me of a wicked queen or a wicked witch who was putting a child in danger. Then surrounding this scenario, we have this beautiful English countryside, and there's this wonderful Gothic mansion, and it sits like next door to this grand tower, which, by the way, the tower was one of my favorite elements of this book, because by how it was utilized, it reminded me a lot of Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. And when Gina and I were discussing the tower, we felt like it was a phallic symbol that represented life. At the end of the day, the reaping didn't scare me or gross me out, but the concept was creepy and I was held in suspense from beginning to end. Also, I quickly became invested in the characters and plot, and I loved the mystery elements of this book where it felt like I was piecing together a puzzle. The Reaping by Bernard Taylor is the perfect book to read, especially if you have just finished reading a book that caused you to overthink or a book that was really heavy. Now, with me saying that, I don't want people to think that this book wasn't sophisticated, because it was really sophisticated. It's just that when you get to the end, literally everything is spelled out for you, so you really don't have to think that much. Also, if you're looking for a book that isn't extreme, The Reaping is the perfect example of subtle horror, and it does provide a great slow burn that causes us to continue turning pages until we arrive at an ending that is equivalent to a wildfire. So, overall, I do highly recommend The Reaping by Bernard Taylor, especially if you're looking to expand your occult reading list. Also, as my good friend Gina said, this book had some really fun vibes to it that reminded us of what would happen if Sherlock Holmes was versing the Satanic Panic. On to the questions. Now, I know I'm probably about to receive a lot of recommendations for Stephen King's The Dark Tower, but I'm going to ask this anyway out of hopes that there's some hidden gems that I haven't heard of. But my first question is, what is a horror book you would recommend about a tower? My second question is, what type of gothic horror do you prefer and why? Like, do you prefer American goth, British goth, Southern goth? Which one? Personally, I love British goth because it seems so rich with its lore and its landscapes, and I just am able to indulge in the whole atmosphere because these are places I might not ever be able to visit. So I really love those aspects of British Gothic novels. But I'm going to have to say American Goth, or more specifically Southern Goth, because the areas that are in the Southern Goth books are ones that I can relate to a lot more, and also I'm familiar with the lore already, especially when it comes down to books like The Elementals by Michael McDowell or The Witching Hour by Anne Rice. So I have some good news about Grandma. I just saw her a few hours ago and she had a huge smile on her face. Like, the last time I had seen her smiling like this was before we had to put her in the hospital. But her therapist has told her that she should be able to come home soon. We don't know exactly when soon is, but judging by how she's able to advance and all of the progress that she's been making, we're thinking that she might be home in about the next week or two, but I don't think it's going to be any longer than that. So I would just like to say thank you for all of your thoughts, your prayers, your positive vibes. It has totally helped out. And the therapist and nurses at the facility she's been at for the last 20 days has done wonders for her. Because unfortunately, the therapy place she was in prior to this, they just really didn't do anything. They just threw her in a bed and left her be. So with her being in this new place, they have helped her a great deal, and hopefully by the next time I speak with you, I'll be able to report that Grandma is finally at home. But once again, thank you so much for just keeping us in your thoughts and prayers. Now that it's time to close out the video, I would like to thank Lisa G as well as J.L. Mulvihill, which J.L. Mulvihill is a young adult steampunk fantasy author, and her books are available in print, ebook, and audio wherever books are sold. Also, I would like to thank Melody Romeo, which Melody Romeo is a historic fiction fantasy author, and her books are available in print and ebook wherever books are sold. And Melody Romeo also goes under a pseudonym by the name of Adele Lane, which Adele Lane focuses on same-sex fiction, and her books are available in print and ebook wherever books are sold. Also, I would like to thank Nicholas Gray, which Nicholas Gray is a horror author whose books are available in print, ebook, and audio wherever books are sold. Also, I would like to thank Lisa Shin, which Lisa Shin is an artist, and you can check out her work on the Facebook page The Art of Shin. Also, I would like to thank horror enthusiast Blake Kelly, and last but not least, I would like to thank my mom and grandma. And if you're wondering why I'm giving a shout out to these wonderful people, it's because they've had the opportunity to contribute to my Patreon account, which I have included a link for that account in the description section of this video. And for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. If you have a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, I'll gladly mention that as well. And I also have a $10 tier available, which this will still give you the shout out. But I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I'll send you over one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off, do whatever you want. Now, if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can continue to have a fun time together. And if you would like to hunt me down on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all available in the description section of this video. And if you have yet to subscribe to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So, until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week, a happy 4th of July, and sweet nightmares.